everybody, welcome to the Poetry Vlog. In today's episode with Laura, what will people learn?
I'm going to be talking about the Shawnee concepts of city and how indigenous language has layers of meaning for me as a poet.
Perfect, thank you.
Of course.
By the end of the episode, you should get some new tools in your toolkit for how to effectively use proper nouns, but specifically in a context where you can disrupt colonial language dynamics, right? And really let the poem explode outward. So I'm really excited about it. You'll also get your specific call from comments from Laura. Laura came up with it, so stay tuned for that. But as always, I want to give you a reminder to give supportive comments below to let artists know you appreciate their time with this work. Of course, like and subscribe, students included. And otherwise, am I forgetting anything?
I don't think so.
Okay, everybody enjoy the show. Welcome to the Poetry Vlog. Today we have Laura Day. Laura, will you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Laura Day. I live in Renton and I grew up here in the Pacific Northwest. I went to school at the Institute of American Indian Arts and at the University of Washington. I was a middle school teacher for about 15 years and I've written 2 books of poetry. My first book was called Tributaries and my most recent book is called Instruments of the True Measure. Both of my books are from the University of Arizona Press's Sun Tracks series, and my website is lauraday.com. It's LAURADA.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Of course.
And I'm really excited that you're here today. We both had to reschedule a lot, and I've been an admirer from afar for a little while, so I just got excited you could be here. We're gonna start by having you read for us.
Sure.
If that works for you.
Yeah.
So will you read us a poem?
I will. I brought some new work because
Perfect.
I wanted to share something that I've been writing that's connected with some of my newer obsessions as a poet.
Exciting.
So I'm going to read kind of a new piece that hasn't been published anywhere. And this piece does use sort of Shawnee language, so it has some indigenous language and indigenous concepts. So this poem is called The Shawnee Word for Principal City. In the case of Chillicothe, the city is contingent on the river as one of the word's 4 chambers. We leave Chillicothe's at our heels, river homes of loading and unloading, the high bank to spare us, deluge is inside the word too. The principal city was devastated by the flood. The many-faced town destroyers allotted our city into a severalty, setting maps to the east, detailing imaginary cities to woo the flood. Chillicothe's drink from the Pequot, the Scioto, drink from Paint Creek, from the lost meanders, Grand Thompson, Wanders Creek, the Red River. Chillicothe is engraved on the tablet as first capital city. In laments, it is the lost capital city of our dominion, the word city called into existence, already existing, carved on the gates of the city by the survivors of the flood.
Thank you.
Of course.
There's a lot of things I like about your work. One of them is that there's this sort of steady insistence on staying in an everyday scene while also reaching outwards to these proper noun places, I call it, right? And insisting that everyday scene is rooted to these different historical spaces. Why did you pick that poem today?
I picked the poem today because I have been really fascinated with the concept of the city.
Okay.
Particularly the changing city, the city in sort of the crosshairs of disaster. And in addition to that, I'm learning my indigenous language alongside my son.
Oh, wow.
So we're learning Shawnee
Yeah.
like mostly through like the internet,
Yeah,
because my tribe publishes like sort of these
Cool.
language mini classes, and so I become very fascinated with what's inside of a word,
Yeah.
and particularly the Shawnee word for city.
Okay.
How incredibly deep the metaphor is inside of like a proper noun.
Yeah.
Because in the case of Shawnee language, often the city is a proper noun.
Yeah.
And so those kind of fascinations sort of
Yeah.
came together, and I wanted to read something brand new.
Yeah. Which is always a privilege, by the way. I always feel like I'm having like a sacred moment when
Yeah.
people
No, I-
bring in new poems. So
I do
I
like
really
that
appreciate
shared
that.
time.
Yeah. So 2 questions that are probably going to seem a little obvious. Will you go through some of the proper nouns in the moments of like learning language that are in this poem, and kind of talk a little bit more about the ways that connects to your own Shawnee heritage, and the different things that you're learning through that, and the different types of knowledge about city that are emerging?
So I think the main word is Chillicothe, which is the Shawnee word for principal city,
Okay.
Like the main city. But inside of the word, there's all these different connotations and meanings. So one element of Chillicothe is that a Chillicothe has to be on a river, which is logical.
Okay, yeah.
But it's on the high bank of the river.
Okay.
So these are kind of words within the word to show
Yeah.
like how to find a city, how to create a
Okay.
city. And then it also is a word that has a sort of connotation of health, of the health of a community being like the health of a body.
Yeah.
So a city in good health is kind of like a body moving in good health, where everything's connected. And I found this metaphor really fascinating because I think it's so significant, and also so wise.
Yeah.
And it does not exist in English. You know,
Okay,
this
yeah.
kind of thinking you just can't find.
Right.
And so in the poem, there's a lot of also mention of rivers. So like the Pequot, the Scioto, Paint Creek. These are all rivers. Pequot and Scioto are indigenous words that are sort of made into English, I suppose. But then it goes on and the words become English. Okay. So I am sort of fascinated with naming in America.
Yeah.
And what is in a name. And then there are Chillicothe's all through kind of Middle America. Everywhere the Shawnee have been, Chillicothe's remain.
Okay.
And, you know, they tend to be, like, there's a big Chillicothe in Ohio.
Okay.
There's Chillicothe's in Kansas and Oklahoma. So I find it just it's so interesting to me as a Shawnee person to have this poorly understood legacy, but that is still, I think, so significant.
And by poorly understood, you mean like just in general, or by particular audiences, or like in what context?
I think poorly understood by, certainly by like white America.
Yeah.
By sort of colonizing America. But I think also like poorly understood by me, in that, you know, I have this incredible legacy of health and of living in a healthy way. And I see a really strong connection between my health and my history of illness, and also who I am and how I connect to land as an indigenous and I'm a descendant of indigenous and settler people.
Yeah.
So I have struggled with pretty severe health complications for the last 5 years or so, or maybe even 6 years. I have an autoimmune disorder that's fairly rare. I didn't understand it well, as a younger person, even as a younger adult. So I ended up having a very sudden and dramatic illness, and I lost all renal function. Yeah. So I was on dialysis for a couple of years, and I got a transplant in 2018, but like pretty continual struggles. And I think in my writing, that idea of the body. Remember we?
I was totally gonna go there. By the way, for context for everyone else, we were just talking about like the body and how it's always brought up in poetry. So we'll put a pin in that because we're gonna go back to that because we're about to blow it up a little bit.
We will,
but
so being separate somehow, from my ancestral history, from how I live on the land, it was like this interesting confrontation to me of what happens when you are broken apart by illness, and then you have to navigate like Western medicine and just capitalism. It to me was really strongly connected with my Shawnee experience of my ancestors being very violently removed from their land.
Two things. One, you can say, no, I'm not going to answer that.
But
if you wouldn't mind expanding, because to me, as someone who studies this stuff a lot and talks about it a lot, it's very obvious how that like disintegration of your understanding of your health and your body is tied to like a colonial violence of your own ancestors being removed from land. It might not be obvious to undergrad students, right?
No. So I think there's so many layers to that. The first layer, I think, is actual sort of historical trauma, and also so my Shawnee ancestors were removed from Ohio into what is now Kansas and then into what is now Oklahoma. During that period, the removal started around 1830, and our nation was very large, very sophisticated and dynamic. Now by, I think, 1890, the nation had been reduced to around 100. So at that point, the reservation system was like a prison system. You couldn't leave without a pass. And it created, I think, a legacy of significant health, I guess trauma, or, and I think that that went along with extreme poverty in my family, very poor access to medicine. So I think, it's a living legacy of genocidal policy. And then I think there's got to be an interesting connection between you're carrying quite a bit of not just sort of like emotional trauma, but also like legacy of like poverty, again, access. And I was raised to have, I think, a sense of myself as a servant, as a person who was, you're meant to be, fit enough to serve your community, and that's kind of where you get value. So I
I feel that really acutely.
I wasn't socialized to be attuned to myself.
And some of that's gender, some of that's colonial again, right? Like there's so many different layers of that sort of like your value is contingent on your ability to be a fit enough person to take care of other people. Yeah, I feel that. Thanks for expanding on it.
Of course.
And then the other question is, what does it mean to have a discrete body that you can then describe as the body in a recognizable way? And I'm wondering about, we have some shared experiences of gender and chronic immune conditions, right? And then, of course, you have the added layer of being indigenous and having that indigenous heritage, right? So what are the ways that it has sort of forced a particular experience or a particular vantage point for thinking about like the body, as opposed to like the way, for instance, the name from Principal City implies a sort of like constantly interdependent, like based on the transition of what comes in and out and across the water passageways where it's located and so forth.
No, I think it's like a very significant idea, and the roots go so deep. I think one element of kind of the body is the idea that your body is separate from your mind or your soul. I think is like that's got such deep like roots in Western thinking. And I do think like as women, for me, there was an element of thinking your body is maybe doesn't belong 100% to you. It's maybe something that you should be ashamed of if you use it or present it in ways that are not commodified or not, control. And that, I mean, for a long time, I think there was a sense that if you got sick, it was a punishment for, something that you're doing wrong. Even now, I feel like people will make a lot of kind of comments about, well, do you take good care of yourself? Like, what are you eating? Things like that, I think, are directly connected to that idea of sort of the body is evil, as like a palace of sin.
Or a palace of non-sin, because you've magically manifested through your goodness having an able body that is like, legible to other people. And I think one piece for me that's really significant is, I survived because somebody donated an organ. And you can't be like,
the organ was donated to the body, because that's not how it was. It was somebody helped me live because they gave a piece of themselves to my body.
Yeah.
And so that distance, it won't keep you alive.
Yeah. No. Well.
Maybe it won't keep you alive.
Exactly. I was gonna say. I think like this is like a hot take, maybe, but like sometimes I feel like the kind of insistent examination of the body is a deep fear of the positioning that has to happen when you can no longer think of it from that kind of like distant way. If that makes sense. So like to make this like undergrad friendly, for instance, usually the first piece of feedback that I find myself giving on student poems is like maybe stay away from these universal or philosophical statements and talk more about like the very nitty gritty particulars of like your experience, which is like a very easy piece of feedback, right? But when you take it to the level of the body, just saying like, and then my knee hurt, without a certain amount of context doesn't actually mean much. You know what I mean? It's like lacking like the context. Like, okay, so like what other types of like environmental situations, as well as like your own family or like the person you're relating to, like what is the dynamic that involves this very particular pain? Right. And having like a chronic condition that like requires this constant like effacing of yourself or having to out yourself all the time in relation to how systems of health work is like pretty rough.
It is hard. And you know when you're coming from an outside culture too, I think you have to know how to translate to get care. And nobody teaches you how to do that. And it's a really difficult system to find oneself in. I never thought that I'd be someone as sort of medicalized as I am. But if I were distant from my own body, I think I'd be in a lot more pain. You know, emotional pain too. I also want to hover over your point about how there's still this sort of like very, very, very old belief in like your mind versus your body. Like in even like so-called secular spaces, there seems to be this belief that your mind is somehow able to transform your body because it's accessing something beyond it. Even if it's not called that, right? I was teasing my friend the other day about how like sometimes I think that in like same thinking spaces, when someone's like, why isn't this one person converted into thinking this way? It's like they expect there to be this like metaphysical experience even while they're talking it from a secular position. You know what I mean? Like you actually though only are what your brain and body are doing at all times. Right? Like there is no like easy dichotomy between like the trauma and emotions and other things you're feeling in the ways that your body manifests it. So when you layer on these ways it's carried on through families as well, it's like how do you then create a space not just for healing but for like relationships in your poetry, for instance, right? Or ways to be vulnerable. Well, I think there's so many different like intersecting pieces to it. I mean, I grew up where everybody worked out of necessity. It's really important to be able to work. And I think that came from poverty. And a hard thing about me, like a lot of times I feel like I grew up in a place where people got sick and they died because they didn't have good health care, you know, and that creates, I think, for me, like it was a bit of a terror of, you know, being like saddled with an illness. And being able to not do that, I think, to me, it's good for me, but I hope it's good for people who are looking at me in my community too. Because, you know, the illness that I have is it's disproportionately prevalent for Indigenous people. And then our access to health care is, it's not sufficient. So that, I hope that I can like think a lot about that false separation and push at it. I mean, you are. You know what I mean? As one last question, because I think there's some things I can cut out later. This is a very teachery question. I think that you're like really effectively using proper nouns in the poem with an enormous amount of like splitting meaning, if that makes sense. So it's not like
I'm gonna hitch on to this proper noun here. It's a secured meaning, like
Right.
Seattle, so people know that that's the city I'm talking about. It's almost the opposite.
Yeah.
It's like here's these different locations and like pathways that have like these different nouns in different languages that actually split open the way we might see that space. So it's partly just a commentary, because I have a lot of students that will like throw in a proper noun and they think it's going to just anchor it.
Yeah.
But in your poem, I feel like it does the opposite. It actually creates like an opening. Do you have any thoughts on that? I don't have a good question.
I
on it.
definitely
It's
do.
just-
In this case, I really want to use proper nouns to confound. Because I think even the idea of city, in the sort of dominant American narrative of indigenous people, it's not a settled people. Whereas for me as a Shawnee, we were settled people. We lived in large cities, and then our oral tradition of contact has a lot to do with being assaulted by uncitied people. We called people town destroyers.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think like that it confounds this false narrative of like you know, functionally like an uncivilized people who you know, perhaps in the American consciousness, settlers thought they deserved to be killed or they deserved to be displaced, but that's not how it was at all. So I like that idea that some of these nouns are functioning to confound, to create questions instead of seeming answers.
And it makes you kind of question, right? Like if the more like functional a city becomes in like a colonial American context, means the more it disintegrates and displaces its people. If like there needs to be a reevaluation of what's considered like city in the first place. Like, so instead of being like these different tribes had cities, ergo they're like us. It's actually like there were actually other conceptions of city. Right? That like are totally lost in the languages we have in an English context.
And that we may need to move forward in
instead
the
of getting
future.
stuck in the like gentrify or leave alone. Gentrify or leave alone. You know, it's like there's actually other ways to build like space and community and people.
And even with indigenous or the Shawnee concept of city being utterly connected to the land that it's on, that worldview that comes inside of a word, you can't destroy the land if your concept of city is in the land too.
And your concept of your own health. I love that. That's perfect. Can we end there? Cool. That was awesome.
That seemed to go really well.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing new work, which I just always think is like unbelievably generous.
Thank you.
Really thank you for that. And thank you for being so open to talking about your own self. In relation to your poetry. Everyone else, remember that I'm always looking for people to drop comments of appreciation first and foremost, because trolls exist. I will delete you if you're a troll. I actually do now, because I'm just not worth it. But you can combat trolls by being the opposite. Is there anything that, like, if people comment, I don't get a lot of comments, but if people did, something you'd want them to comment with?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd be really interested in hearing students talk about their experience of language, you know, and their experience of how different languages sort of net concepts, especially in interaction with English. So, you know, I'm very curious about other linguistic traditions.
This will be especially useful, I think, for not just our international students, but students coming from different parts of Washington where they are like multilingual and they're having to navigate this all the time. So I especially hope to hear from you all. Right? And then remember to like and subscribe, because I want to get a personalized URL and I have to have that to get that. And then thepoetryvlog.com is linked below, and it has the links to Instagram, which is merged with my personal account because I can only do so much Instagram in a day. Twitter, which is where I kind of post updates but also talk with people a little more. And then there's also a Facebook page where there's sometimes Facebook live teach-ins, and I'll post clips from the different videos. So there's a lot of different places that you can keep up with the poetry vlog if you're not in my classroom, or if you are. And then as a reminder, you can find Laura Day online where?
LauraDay.com, LauraDA.com.
Perfect. And I can't encourage you enough to go out and buy her books. And if you buy them directly from the press, you're supporting the author and the press even more. So that's a special boost in that direction. All right, I think that's it.
Okay.
Anything else?
No, that was great.
All right, thanks again.
Great. Of course.
Okay, bye everybody.
Bye.